I'm Brian Friese alongside Laura Duncan, and you're listening to the Triggered and True podcast. This is a podcast that's all about you, discovering you, going back for you, being with you. You're more than the pain you've experienced, the behaviors you're expressing, and the thoughts that run through your head. Together, we will find your true self, which has always been with you. It's just been covered up. Tune in as we show you how to feel your pain, get comfort, and go play as you return to you. It's time to transform from triggered to true. Hello and welcome everybody to this episode of Triggered and True. Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Brian?
I'm good. For those watching on YouTube, Laura is in a new setting today, so we're excited about that. There was work being done at her office, so she is doing this from home.
Yeah. My Wi-Fi here, I think it's going to work. Sometimes I have Wi-Fi issues at my office.
Yeah. That was the last time we tried to record. We had to make some changes there. So, well, this is a very exciting episode that we have today because it is probably long overdue. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we've touched on it a little bit. But I think didn't we do one faith one, but this is a lot more in depth and has a lot more connected to it.
Yeah. So it's been something that's been requested by people. And so we're going to be talking today about the compassion method in the context of the Christian faith, and maybe specifically how the compassion method can help one live their Christian faith. But then also for someone that maybe isn't a Christian, just to help you better understand a little bit of some of the things we've talked about on the podcast as we've gone, just a little bit of where some of the genesis for the compassion method came from. So Laura, why don't you just start off by giving us just a kind of a brief overview of your faith journey and kind of what you believe.
Yeah. So, big story, being raised in Christian home, mostly, traditional with a little bit of charismatic in there, wanting to, especially after when I turned 18, I definitely was like, I really want my whole life to be centered around God. And so I started kind of going down that journey. And I had some like typical teenage moments where I hadn't made the best choices. So now I was like, all right, I want to recommit to my faith. And what I believed was if you recommit to your faith, then you have really good behavior. That's what it mostly centered around. So when I read the Bible, I would read the Bible based on kind of a to-do list of what I should do or what I shouldn't do. And I was pretty good at being good until I wasn't. So most of the time.
Wait, Laura, you have a bad streak? No.
I know I have a bad streak.
Wait a second. This is new information for me.
Well, the thing about it was, I'd be
like, what did you do wrong? Like you jaywalked?
Yeah, that I jaywalked. Yeah. No, but what would happen would be that I would do really well. I'd do all the right things. I would have the right behavior. I would do all the things that I felt like I was supposed to be doing. But then periodically, it wouldn't happen every day by any means, but maybe every, 3 to 6 months, I'd have a moment.
You made a mistake every 3 to 6 months.
Okay. Probably every 3 to 6 months.
I'm sorry. I'm stealing your thunder. Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine.
You were reading the Bible as a to-do list, and every 3 to 6 months, you made a mistake. Okay.
I made more mistakes than that, but I would make the mistakes that would give me the hopeless feeling of no matter how hard I try to do the right thing, and no matter how good at it I get, and all the things I say no to, at the end of the day, I can't be perfect 100% of the time. And that was both a hopeless feeling, but it also kind of started leading into maybe there's a better way to do this. Even though I didn't know exactly what that would look like or what that would be, being able to actually have faith without shame was ultimately where the compassion method led me in my spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And one of the big things, and I think I shared this in the last faith episode, or I've shared it other times, one of the things that started the whole compassion method was God actually speaking to me and saying, I want you to stop medicating with me. And it was so offensive to me because I've been doing all the right things. I went through my husband dying. I didn't get bitter. I still had faith. I still prayed for people to be healed. I still believed that God was good. And then he's saying, but you're medicating with me. And so it was so frustrating. It was kind of the same thing of doing everything right. And then him being like, you're medicating with me. And I didn't really understand what that meant either. Because I was like, but I'm praying and I'm worshiping and I'm going to church and I'm doing all the things. Why would that be medicating with you? And so it took me about 5 days to actually listen because I was arguing for 5 days. And finally, he was just like, you keep going to me with all of your pain, but you don't allow me to be with you in your pain. You're not willing to feel your pain. You just
Mm,
want me to take it away without actually being with you in the process. And even on a neurological level, when you worship and you pray, it releases endorphins into your system and you feel all better.
mm.
But it's really was a suppression of my pain because every time I went to God, I felt better, but I never actually acknowledged my pain.
That's really deep. And one of the things that jumped out to me was what you said about he can't be with you in your pain if you won't let yourself feel the pain.
Yes. And that's what he was saying. He's
Yeah.
always been with me, and I knew he'd been with me because we had a real connection, a real relationship, but I would not go towards my pain, and I would not allow him to go towards my pain because pain actually felt like almost like sin to me. Like it felt like when you're in pain, that means you don't believe enough. If you're in pain, that means that you don't know God well enough. If you knew God well enough, you wouldn't feel pain. So it
Hmm.
almost felt like a sin or like wrong or bad to feel pain.
Or a lack of faith.
Yep, exactly. If I really knew the God of the universe, I would never feel pain.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, we live on an earth that there is pain. We experience pain on this earth. But instead of actually acknowledging that and acknowledging it not just from there's pain and we need to fix it, like we need to fix mistakes in our lives, but actually seeing the pain and acknowledging that it's actually precious to feel pain, especially when you invite God into it.
Hmm. Yeah. And Jesus is known of a man of sorrows.
Yeah.
So,
And he really, really is comfortable with pain.
hmm.
And just like I said, like it feels like he didn't want to be around my pain because it was wrong and like sin, and God doesn't like sin, so he wouldn't want to be around my pain. And he's definitely, because it's intimacy.
Yeah.
If I feel my pain and I invite him into feeling my pain, I invite him in to the most vulnerable, intimate parts of my heart that religion will not allow you to access. Therefore, you can't connect with God through religion.
Right. Well, this kind of what you're saying is really along the lines of what I've heard you say before, that before the compassion method, there was a gap between
Yeah.
what the Bible said
Yep.
and then trying to do it. So you're
Exactly.
really hitting on that right here.
Yep. And then, yeah, definitely. Like, again, like I said, I was pretty good at being good, but I couldn't be perfect. So it always bumped back in up against my humanity, which also included my pain.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the medication part there, because when people hear that, I mean, that could, to a religious or a spiritual person, that could be a little bit offensive. Like,
No, it sure is.
you know, what do you mean my worship could just be me medicating?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the medication part of that and as a protector.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
what you're doing. You're actually using the worship instead of going and let yourself feeling the pain.
Yep.
You're engaging in religious activity, which isn't a lot different. It's different, but to your heart, it's not all that different than going for a run or for even doing something harsher,
Yes. No,
alcohol or
no,
drugs, or
exactly. No, it is. It's a medication.
it's a
And it's
numbing.
actually, at a neurological level, it's completely a medication because, again, it releases that serotonin, it releases those endorphins. And we literally feel, I'm fine. I'm fine. And that's why
Mhm.
people go to church ready to kill each other. And
Yeah.
they get into worship and they worship and they're like, all better. But they never actually dealt with why they wanted to kill each other before the church service. They just covered it up with worship and everything's okay now.
So we're in no way saying that that is wrong to worship,
No, and
but what God was speaking to you was,
yes,
if you actually want to, you're not actually connecting with me in that process either.
no.
Yeah.
I might
You
be
got me at arm's
worshiping
distance.
him,
Yeah.
but I'm not connected to myself. So there's not a communion happening because it's a one-sided relationship.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not willing to face my pain and I just worship him, but my worship doesn't come from the deep places of my heart, whether that be joy or pain, then we're not actually having relationship.
Right. I read a really great verse that I think actually ties to what you're saying. So let me read this let me
Yeah.
read this once. I think it ties in. Got a frog in my throat.
No.
All right. So I was reading this in the Message Bible the other day. It's from 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 11 through 13. Paul says in the Message translation, dear Corinthians, I can't tell you how much I long for you to enter this wide open, spacious life. We didn't fence you in. The smallness you feel comes from within you. Your lives aren't small, but you're living them in a small way. I'm speaking as plainly as I can with great affection. Open up your lives, live openly and expansively. To me, what you were describing is that
Yeah,
your pain had fenced you in.
exactly.
You were, and we see this all the time. People's pain prevents them from living the
Exactly.
life
And I
that
love how it
God
says you're
longs for them to live.
small. Yeah,
Yeah.
because in the compassion method, you are small. So that's the thing that happens when I medicate and I don't feel my pain, I become very small. And in that smallness, that's how I see God. And that's actually how I live my life. When we live our lives based on the knowledge of good and evil, we live a life that is very small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so much of the compassion method is about opening up. And we're going to open ourselves up and be vulnerable,
Yeah.
but it's about opening up our lives to the potential.
Exactly.
That's
Oh,
our
yeah.
true
No, it's
self.
amazing. The fruit I see, even though that's not necessarily the reason why I help people connect to themselves, it's for them first. But the byproduct is your faith expands, not just faith in God, which is definitely a primary faith that does expand, but your faith in yourself, your faith in your finances, your faith in your abilities, all those things start to expand as you start to recognize you're made in his image and you start to recognize who you are. And you're no longer medicating, but rather facing your pain and allowing the love of God, that's ultimately the compassion and love of God, to come in and be with us in our darkest places. And our darkest places, I actually don't believe are sinful places. I believe our darkest places are the darkest places of pain that we still have trapped within us that we haven't been able to face yet.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Your darkest places aren't sin. So, in faith circles in theology, there's kind of different camps. One
Mm-hmm.
camp is where we're inherently sinful, we're fallen,
Yes.
we're all these different things. Another camp is no, we've been redeemed, we've been set back.
Mm-hmm.
Our mind hasn't quite caught up with that yet,
Exactly.
which
Especially because
also
we're
is
trapped in certain
in
parts of our
pain.
brain because of pain and
Right.
childhood.
So why do we sin? Is it because we're inherently evil beings, or is it because we haven't stewarded our hearts well? We have pain inside
Exactly.
that
Because if
causes
you,
us to
yeah,
act contrary. In our pain, we act contrary to who we are, which is what we talk about with the trigger.
yep, exactly.
Our
And that's
triggered
not
self
who
is
you
not who
are.
we are. Right.
No, even though we all, every single human triggers, even Jesus, every single human triggers, but it's not because of the sin that is a fruit of it. It's because they actually feel pain. Even when you think back to Adam and Eve,
And
there's
obviously, just because you trigger doesn't mean it's sin.
exactly.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Jesus did not sin, but he
Right.
did trigger. And so he had a neurological process that caused him to go into his amygdala to some capacity, that he had a
Mm-hmm.
reaction and a trigger. And he talks about it a little bit, like just because he's connecting with our humanity because he became man, he became a human
He
to
had
come
to
to this
feel what we
earth
felt. Right.
to feel every single thing we did. And so some people will argue the point and say, oh, he wasn't triggered. I'm like, it's impossible. If he was a human with a brain, he triggered.
Mm-hmm.
But he never sinned with his trigger. He had the reaction without it leading to sin, because ultimately I believe he had time with God to help heal those places in his heart so that he didn't sin. I don't think it was just like willpower that he didn't sin. I think it was an overflow of obviously being God, but also he emphasizes over and over again his time with God.
Yeah.
And his time with God, I believe, was a place of nurturing his humanity, even though he was God, being with him, loving him, teaching him, protecting him, being with him.
Yeah. And that's a lot for someone to chew on, but I mean, it definitely, and I really appreciated ministry school on that aspect. I mean, we talked a lot about our identity because I probably was of a camp a little bit more of like, I'm just a worthless, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And shame. So really what it was is you're stuck in shame.
Yeah. But
So
I
unfortunately, church
notice
sometimes traffics in shame.
oh no, it definitely does. After you start being aware of shame, you're like, oh my goodness, you just like kind of like see it
Well,
everywhere because
really, I see it in my parenting. I'm like, oh my God, what am I
oh
doing?
yeah, oh for sure. But
Like,
one
this is
thing,
shame.
because you've
Yeah.
mentioned in the past that one of the gifts that you didn't receive as much that sometimes you kind of have go back to is not feeling like you're enough or not feeling like you're good
Hmm.
enough.
Yep.
And I find that people actually kind of medicate with the worthlessness of their humanity. And people say like that one, like we're all our righteousness is filthy rags and I'm worthless. And there's a bunch of scriptures that are like really like scum of the earth kind of scriptures.
Yeah.
And people actually like gravitate towards it and say them almost with affection. And I always thought that was weird because that wasn't my lack and that wasn't my trigger. I would be like, why are they so happy to be so worthless? But it's because it actually reinforces my lack of not being enough.
Hmm.
And it feels like it gives validation to not being enough because how they describe our righteousness or self-righteousness is it feels like the same feeling of not enough.
Right.
And
Yeah.
when you know you're enough, you don't gravitate towards those. It doesn't mean that you become self-righteous, but you're actually able to receive the righteousness of God because that's when you think of unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God is righteousness, joy, and peace.
Hmm.
So to actually have true righteousness, it's not doing good things. It's actually knowing who we were created to be that allows us to receive the righteousness of God.
Well, and for me, it's along the lines of what you're saying. One of the things that I always struggled with was, especially with Christians, because when I first started taking my faith seriously, I thought Christianity just by itself solved all the world's problems.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Me too.
Well, in some ways it does because it
True.
solved the sin problem, right?
Yeah.
But just having faith without actually doing this heart work, which to me connects to the Bible,
Exactly.
Proverbs 4:23 is one thing I talk about a lot when I talk to people about the
Yeah.
compassion method because it says, above all else, guard your heart,
Yeah.
for it is the wellspring of life. Like all of your life comes through your heart.
It
And the,
does.
the compassion method for me personally is like a very practical way to do Proverbs
Yes.
4:23.
Yep. Exactly.
So it helps me make my faith effectual, I guess, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes any sense. But it
Yeah.
also helped me
Definitely.
really make sense of the world because
Mm-hmm.
I would be so confused when I would see a pastor
Yep.
sin or a
Yeah.
pastor. And now I recognize his heart's just not taken care of.
Yep. Exactly.
People are hurting each other because they hurt. People are
Yep.
doing dumb things because they hurt
Exactly.
and they have pain they haven't taken care of,
And I think one of
needs
the
that haven't been
things
met.
that actually sets people of faith up for failure, as far as maybe a pastor or just any Christian, is the fact that we think that spirituality alone will actually allow us to make good choices all the time.
Well, worship alone by
Exactly. No,
itself, it's going
exactly.
to fix all of our problems. No,
Exactly.
it's
And no,
not.
we actually need to tend to our hearts as well as to our spirits. Of course, it's mind, body, spirit, our mind being both our logical brain and our heart brain, and being able to recognize that if those are not taken care of, even if we're the most spiritual person. And, speaking of Bethel, they have you read a book called God's Generals. And it's about all these different people that did amazing things for God. They were anointed and they healed and they preached and they did all these amazing things. But almost every single one of them had moral failure because they were so focused on the spiritual realm, they didn't tend to their hearts. And what happens when we feel the medication of spirituality, the purity of spirituality, that I can do no wrong, I'm anointed. But the back door that causes, I believe, moral failure and sin is the negligence of the heart that makes room for us to make decisions that are contrary to who we are in God.
I think this connects really well to a quote that I heard you say. I love sometimes I read these quotes back to Laura and she'd be like,
I'm
that's
like,
really
wow.
good. Where'd you get that from? I'm like, you said it. You said it. It's in my notes. So this is one I had in my notes that you had said. You said, our triggered self cannot grow spiritually. Our true self is not a fully developed person and is growing. Our true self remains stuck when we cannot comfort a trigger.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about right now is people that have a trigger, people that have pain.
Yeah.
They're stuck developmentally.
Yeah.
They can't grow spiritually.
Mm-mm.
And what we're trying to
No.
do is comfort that trigger, comfort the pain behind that trigger.
Yeah.
And it will help you grow.
Yep. Exactly. And when we comfort that trigger, again, it invites God into that pain as well. And then that allows us to reconnect with our true self. And also, I believe our true self is directly connected to our spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing you said is that to know yourself is to love yourself. So you said to truly know God, we have to know us first. And he's living in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's
the same
impossible.
power that raised you from dead lives inside of us. But
Yes.
when we're stuck in a trigger, we're not able to see that, believe it, connect with it.
So if we can't connect to ourself, he's in there, you're saying.
Always. He said he'd never leave us and he'd never forsake us. But if we leave ourselves, he stays with ourselves and we leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of picture him kind of like in the story of the prodigal son, how the father's sitting on the porch and the son's returning. And he's like, I can just picture him like sitting on the seat of my heart, like just tapping his foot, just patiently waiting there. Hey,
I'm here waiting to connect.
I'm right here. Whenever you want to come back and you be with you, guess what? You're automatically with me at the same time.
Exactly. I love that. I love that. Even if we get triggered, causes a reaction, causes us naturally to push away, that he's always there waiting for us to come home to ourselves. And that's why when I say, when we come home to our true selves, when we come home, it's such a homecoming because it is that prodigal son returning both to who God created him to be and to God, because God is with us.
Yeah.
And I love that he doesn't, he's always with us, but I love that he's not impressed or chasing our triggers. He stays with us. And that was part of the religious part that was so hard for me, because I felt like when I trigger, I'm sinning. So God removes himself from me because he doesn't want to be around my triggered self. But it's actually quite the opposite.
Yeah, we're the ones that hide.
Exactly. He's actually staying with who I really am. And I'm reacting over here. And he's like, I'm right here with you. And then as soon as I turn my affections back to myself and stop blaming the trigger, and I turn my affections back to myself, I'm right there with him again.
We talked about this when we talked about shame, like in the garden when Adam and Eve sinned.
Yeah.
Who drove them into the bushes? Shame drove them into the bushes.
Yes.
God didn't remove. God came to be with them again. He knew what happened. He knew what happened. It's not like he didn't know. You know, he knew what happened, and he still came to be with them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
I always say, and even though this is it's obviously not what happened in the Bible, but I always think if he saw us for what we did, not for who we are, he never would have come to Adam and Eve directly. He would have sent an angel on his behalf to kick him out of the garden, because he wouldn't want to be with us, because he saw us for what we did. But because he didn't see us, he saw what we did. But because he didn't see us for what we did, he saw us for who we are. He could come and be with us even though we sinned.
You A lot of Christians are very scared of sin.
Hmm.
So just talk a little bit about the impact that that has.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that happens when we're scared of sin. So if pain leads us to sin, because that's how I believe it works, that we don't just wake up one morning and go, oh, I just want to go sin. We hurt, we feel alone, we feel scared, we feel trapped, and we react. And then in our reaction is usually where we sin. But what I think about being afraid of sin is actually being afraid of our triggers.
Mm.
We're so scared of doing the wrong thing. We're so scared of reacting in the wrong way that we reject ourselves because we're rejecting ourselves because we believe that we are sinful, that we're wrong, that we're evil, that we're bad.
Well, that's why I was just thinking. We think that sin is who we are, or
Exactly.
whatever particular thing we're doing. Like
Exactly. We
that's
think
who
it's
we
our
are.
identity and that's who we are. And we have to stop doing that to actually come back to ourselves. Where in fact, we're always who God creates us to be. Colossians 1:20 says that Jesus has restored us back to himself. We're restored back to him. We just trigger and react, make mistakes, usually in our reactions. And our avoidance of sin is usually avoidance of the wound that causes to trigger.
Hmm. Yeah. So in a way, that avoiding pain kind of falls into that. Sin connects back to our pain, and we're.
Exactly. And so,
Mhm.
in most people, whether we are aware of it or not, we do see triggers as sin and we see pain as sin.
Yeah, and sometimes it is. Sometimes the trigger is sin, but
No, definitely.
yeah,
Oh no,
yeah, right,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like that's why one of my quotes is what you do matters. You matter more.
yep,
Sin matters. Making
yeah.
mistakes matters. There's consequences for it. It's not God's design for us. And it matters a lot.
Well, and I think the people that could be very scared of sin when we start saying things like this, like, "Oh, you're condoning sin," and the reality
Hmm.
is that what we do can have enormous consequences, but still doesn't mean it's who we are,
Exactly. And it also doesn't mean we're not deserving through the blood of Jesus, not deserving of love. That's one of
right?
the saddest things about it is that we believe that sin separates us from God, but
Hmm.
God is a holy God that won't be connected to our sin, but he can still be connected to us. That's why he says, when you were still in sin, I died for you
Yeah, he didn't
because
wait.
I knew who you were. I didn't wait till you got better to be with you. So we get to be loved whether we do right or wrong. I remember my husband Jeff, before he passed away, he wrote a letter to each of the kids. And one of my daughters has always had more challenges in her behavior and her triggers. And he told her, I said, I want you to know that I'm proud of you when you make mistakes. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
proud of you. He said, I'm proud of you when you make bad choices. And I'm proud of you when you make good choices because I'm always proud of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And when he wrote that 13, 14 years ago before the compassion method, I actually didn't like it. I was like, I don't think you should be proud of her when she's making bad choices. Because if you're proud of her, you're going to enable or, somewhat, tell her it's okay if she makes bad choices. I didn't like it. It actually made me feel uncomfortable.
Well, it's kind of like the Bible talks about how we are the apple of his eye. What
Hmm.
he's saying to your daughter is that you are the apple of my eye when you make bad choices,
Yeah,
and you're the apple of my eye when you make good choices.
exactly. And that's how
I
it
might not be in
felt.
love with what you do.
No,
I might not
exactly.
like what you're doing.
Mm-mm.
It might hurt my heart. It probably hurts my heart. It does hurt my heart if you're making bad choices. It
Yeah.
hurts me. I don't
Yep.
like it for you. It's not what I
Yep.
want for you, but you're still the apple of my eye.
Exactly. And that is the truth that we lose sight of when we
Mm.
believe that when we're triggered or in sin, we're no longer loved by God. And when we do good, we're loved by God. But when we do bad, we're no longer loved by God.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. When you started the compassion method with having a very spiritual background, you've talked to me how there was a temptation to always like go right to God. Like if
Hmm.
somebody was across from you
Oh,
hurting,
yeah.
you're like, let's pray, let's go right to God.
Yep.
But it was actually a word you felt from God Himself to
Hmm.
redirect you a little bit on that.
Yes, definitely. Because I had been in so many different modalities before I was learning the compassion method. And I really believe God already knew I would just go do what I know, what we all do. I would just go, okay, well, I'll do this process. We'll focus on shame. We'll focus on compassion. We'll do this process, but God's still going to come in. He's going to take care of everything every time. Like that would just be my default. But one of the things he said, until you bring a gift giver, a mom and dad to stand in the gap for what their parents were able to give you, don't bring me in there because I'll come in and I'll make them feel better, but I'll be a fantasy in their mind. I won't be a reality in their mind or in their hearts or in their faith.
Well, and to kind of drive this home, the way you first explained this to me is you said that God was talking to you like, don't bring me into this equation until I have been properly introduced.
Exactly. I love saying it that way. Thanks for reminding it. But yeah, when he's been properly introduced by having tangible representations, because he is intangible, and he's been properly introduced by being represented by humans, then we can actually receive the reality of God.
And I think we talk a lot about in Christianity about how we are his hands and feet.
Mm-hmm.
We are a temple. He in him we live and move and have our being. Well, what we're really saying, and like a very core element of the compassion method, is that God tangibly meets these needs in people, these core emotional needs that you call the 10 gifts.
Yeah.
I think it's episodes 5 and 25, podcast episodes
Good
5 and
memory.
25 really hit the 10 gifts.
Yep.
But these 10 developmental needs that every human being needs in early childhood development, God meets those needs in humanity through people.
Exactly. Because if we haven't experienced that, then we're only connecting with God with the fantasy of him being a perfect God that's going to love us no matter what, but not having tangible eyes look at us with unconditional love, tangible body language, hear us, someone hold us. So much of the time I've heard people say, I just wish God could come down as Jesus or come down as himself in form and hug me.
And he has, and he is,
and he is,
done it.
yep,
Yeah.
over and over again. We just missed it.
Yeah. Well, the reality is too, in our pain, we pushed it away.
Exactly.
Because like
and
when
that's
we're
why
hurting, we won't let people be close. Like I just noticed myself doing this the other night.
Yeah.
I was laying in bed and my wife came over to give me a hug, and I was really triggered from something at work. And I was just like, I was squirming. I so did not want to be hugged. I'm like,
it's the weirdest
just
thing.
leave
It's
me
like,
alone.
like you feel like you want to like resist. It's not even just like you don't receive it. You want to resist it.
Yeah. It's like, and I'm like, and I caught myself doing it. I'm like, why am I resisting love?
Yeah.
Why am I resisting? I'm hurting. I've boxed myself in.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, to let the love in, guess what else I have to do?
Feel the pain.
I got to feel the pain.
Yep. And that's
Because
where
I can't have, I can't just have the love.
Yep. And that's why when
I gotta feel the
affection
pain.
comes into the trigger, into the wound that we're feeling, it actually offends us. It's like salt in the wound because we're not ready to feel the pain. So we push people away to avoid feeling the pain, like you just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think so much of the compassion method is designed to help give us eyes to see where God was bringing those gifts into our lives.
Yeah.
Because as you teach in the modality here, that God's plan was for that to come from our biological parents, the 10 gifts.
Yep.
Seen, heard, and affection, and all these things we're talking about, protection and provision, all those things would come from our biological parents.
Yeah.
However, we live on planet Earth. No matter how good of home you had or bad a home you had, whatever the situation, your parents were not able to give you in the fullness all of those 10 gifts.
They couldn't properly introduce you to God in every way that he wanted to be introduced to you. So he sends other real humans with real tangible experience to make God real to us.
And we have to know that in our relationship with God, in those areas that our parents couldn't provide for us.
Oh, yeah.
That's where we're going to
see that all the time. Yeah. Whenever anyone brings up their struggle with faith, it's usually it is always connected either to a wound they experience, or it's connected to a lack of receiving one of the gifts. You hear it with like, I don't feel like God hears me. Right. Did your mommy and daddy hear you? No. No wonder you don't think God hears you. I don't feel like God really is going to protect me. Bad things are going to happen to me. He's not going to really protect me. Did your mom and dad, did they protect you?
Mm-hmm.
Every single time it's linked to either a wound or an unmet need when we have struggle, disillusionment, or disappointment with God.
Oh, I had a great quote.
Oh, good.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to say who said it till I read it.
Okay, good. I like
Then
that.
we can guess.
Okay.
This very wise person said, however we feel about God is how we felt about our mom and dad. Everything comes back to God, but our access point is affected by your lack from childhood.
That's amazing. That articulates exactly what I said so well. Can you actually say it one more time?
You said it too, by the way.
Like, that is really good.
This is
I
your
really
quote
agree
from my
with
notes.
that. No, I
Back when we
love
were
the
meeting one on
wording of
one.
it. Yep.
If
No,
anybody
I
just
love the wording.
happens to be picking up that has not listened to our episodes before, because this could be an episode that somebody catches for the first
Stumbles
time,
upon,
because
yeah.
um, Laura and I have a long history of meeting one on one with her, and I take meticulous notes. So that's where this
I'm so
quote got
glad
pulled
that
out
you
of.
did. Yeah, if you could read it again, because I feel
Yep.
like it really articulates it well.
Yep. You said, however we feel about God is how we felt about our mom and dad. Everything comes back to God, but our access point is affected by our lack from childhood.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then, kind of to go right along with that, you said to one degree or another, we are all living the consequences of these needs, these 10 gifts not being given to us, or these needs not being met in our early childhood development.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's in every relationship. But
Yep.
because we're talking about our relationship with God, it is directly impacted by our lack. And we can pretend, we can say in a non-triggered moment, oh no, God's all the 10 gifts to me. And oh no, God loves me all the time. We have the best relationship. But when it really comes down to it, when you're in a triggered state, when you have a lot of pressure put on you, when you no longer can um, stay in your adult brain to be able to believe these things, it's not going to feel true to you and your trigger. I see so many Christians say, oh no, God's everything to me. But as soon as they're in a triggered state, they really don't believe it anymore. And that's where a lot of, again, the
Yeah.
disappointment and
And that's where
disillusionment
the
and
shame
resentment
comes in
towards
too.
God.
It's like, oh,
Exactly.
I don't have enough faith. My faith is weak. I'm triggered.
Exactly.
I'm not believing.
Yep.
No, there's a reason you're not believing, because
Yes.
you've got some pain. It's
Yep.
blocking you from actually
Yep.
believing what the Bible says.
Exactly. We are naturally wired to believe God, to believe the Bible. The only reasons we stop believing is because pain and lack is causing our brains to not be able to connect to God in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I think is important when we talk about the gifts, a big difference between what you do and maybe I actually have never taken a psychology class in my life, but I've heard people talk about psychology, and I've heard you talk about it. But like, one of the things I've heard you talk about, like psychology, a lot of times they talk about like when things went wrong in childhood, it's like you just got to deal with that. So you're a
Yeah.
kid that didn't get this in childhood, and you're just going to have to kind of manage that the
Yeah.
rest of your life.
Yeah.
But the way you speak it and the way you teach it, it's not like no, you don't manage it. You heal
Mm-mm.
it. And guess what?
Mm-hmm.
You can be 100%.
Yeah.
Well, let's say on earth, does anything ever get to be 100%? But you
It may
can
not be
live.
100% on earth, but it can be a high percentage of
Yes.
living like that because your needs are met. And doesn't mean you won't ever get triggered again. It doesn't mean you won't ever feel emotions, but your ability to go through anything is so much greater because you are connected.
Right. You can live like that Bible verse we talked about. You can live,
Mm-hmm.
open up your lives, live openly and expansively.
Yeah,
You,
exactly.
your life does not have to be boxed in a corner because you had a
Yep.
hideous childhood.
Yeah, and I love that. It actually, when I read the Bible through the shame lens, which would be reading the Bible through the knowledge of good and evil,
Yeah.
I felt like I could never get to what you're talking about. It always actually, I would, so many times when I was done reading the Bible, I'd feel hopeless. But I tell myself, this is the Bible, you have to read it because this is what God told us to read. But I'd feel very hopeless after
Hmm.
because I would be like, the thing, like Paul says, the thing I will to do, I don't do, and the thing I will not to do, I do. And it was so hopeless to me because it was centering around my behavior. But
Yeah.
when I actually started to have it center around who I was, all of a sudden, like when you read certain stories or you hear certain instructions, there's a joy to it. There's an
Right.
excitement to it. There's possibility. It no longer feels impossible and hopeless. It actually feels so possible for me to do the things that are promised to us to be able to do once we were able to line up with God's love in that way.
Well, and speaking about the hope and what's possible, an absolute core tenet, and we've talked about this before, but of the compassion method is that God knew what our parents could and couldn't give us.
Yeah.
And this is stuff you've talked about. He knew what our parents couldn't give us,
Yep.
and he sent us that in other forms
Yep.
through other people, through
Mm-hmm.
teachers, through
Yeah.
neighbors, maybe our friends' parents,
Yep.
coaches, youth leaders, different things like that. God sent those gifts in other packages.
Yeah.
And that's part of what the compassion
There's
method is, giving the
always
eyes to
hope.
see.
Exactly. It's
That's the
always
hopeful
hope there
part.
because he's been with us all along the way in a tangible, practical way. And it always makes me believe even more in God and even more in God's love because I feel so well taken care of. The more gift givers I can see in my life, I can see him being with me all the way back to being a couple years old.
And as I started learning this, I realized that this wasn't hopeful in that whimsical, like just Pollyanna
Yeah, like
type thing where I'm
one day we're
forcing
going to be
myself.
okay. Yeah,
It's
Jesus
like,
loves us.
I'm like, no, I mean, this gift of enough came somewhere. This
Oh,
gift of
yeah.
being protected came somewhere.
Yeah.
And, you
And
know,
I talk a lot about it being like customized. That's also what excites me. Like it's customized because you're a unique person and I'm a
mm,
unique person. And we potentially both didn't receive one of the gifts, but how your image of God and who God created you to be is going to process that is a unique way that only you're going to process your lack and your pain. So
yeah.
he customized sending particular people into your life that would fit who
Mm,
you are. And I love that too, because it means we were always known and he always knew what we needed down to these little details. When people find certain gift givers, it's so custom fit that like, I've had people cry and be like, this is what I was waiting for that I didn't realize I was waiting for because this is what I needed to experience. And when they experience it, they realize how loved they are by God because it's so perfectly fitting their need being met.
yeah. Man, I love that. I actually just had an experience with this trigger that I had it was something from work, but I was laying in bed and I couldn't sleep, or I'd fallen asleep and woken up and couldn't fall back. And I was laying there fighting, facing it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh man, I gotta let myself feel this. I can't just will myself back to sleep. That's what I'd like to do
No,
is just will
I
myself back to
know.
sleep and just ignore it a little
Yep.
longer. But it's like, no, it's 2:30 a.m. and it's not, I can't get up yet and I need some sleep and I'm gonna have to like let myself feel this. So I let myself feel it. I worked through the process. I got to, the tender part. What was I? I
Yeah.
was scared. And
Hmm.
and what do I need? I was feeling unprotected. I needed to feel
Yeah.
protected. When you
Yeah.
talked about the gift giver coming very customized,
Yeah.
the particular person that I chose is a person that he's a little bit edgy.
Hmm.
He's a little bit confrontational. He
Yeah.
definitely rubs some people the wrong way,
Yeah.
but he does not rub me the wrong way.
It's
Like,
exactly what you need.
because
There's a, yeah.
I can see how other people
Yeah.
can sometimes get, because
That's exactly what I'm talking
he's
about. Yeah.
intense and he's
Yeah.
intense too. But yet I've felt that feeling of protection in his
Hmm.
presence,
I
that
love
tangible
that.
feeling. But you have to get little to feel it because he's my age. So I'm like,
Hmm.
because when I'm with him, I'm like,
Your peers.
I don't really
When you're
need
in
him to,
your
yeah.
adult brain and you're not triggered, your peers.
He
But
is a
when
pretty
you're in
big guy. I mean, he could
yeah.
protect me, but I don't need it
Yeah.
like that. You know what I'm
No, you
saying?
don't. But when you're a child, you needed it.
But you have to get little with that.
Yep.
I had to let myself get little with my pain. The
Yep.
bigger my trigger, the littler I know I am, the
Hmm.
smallness that I feel, I'm really, really
Yep.
little. And that little me, man, that feeling of protection goes a
Yeah.
long way. I fell asleep.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
fell
I
asleep.
love that.
Interestingly, 2 nights later, similar-ish trigger, still stuff
Yeah.
from work, is a
Yeah.
little bit different. Here I
Yeah.
am again. I'm back at it again. Go through the whole process. And what is it this time? Still protection. I'm
Yep.
still scared. But this time, I needed it from a female.
Wow.
I
Yep.
needed the female expression of it.
Mm-hmm.
So then I remembered another time where I felt that. And I felt
Yeah.
that from a lady that gave me a prophetic word, actually,
Huh.
at a
Interesting.
very,
Yeah.
very timely time. She actually gave it to
Yeah.
my wife, and my wife related to me. But
Yeah.
she gave a prophetic word at a very, very timely time that
Mm.
completely landed. And it
Wow.
was obvious this woman had been praying for me. It was
You felt the
obvious that
care of it.
I
Yeah.
felt the care of it.
The
Like
word was powerful, but the care of it was connected
it
to it
wasn't
as well.
just this random thing just out of
Yeah.
the air. But because this was also someone I was in a relationship with. So I knew. So it was
Yeah.
like that spiritual protection that this woman
Mm-hmm.
prayed for me and this woman
Yeah.
intercedes for me. And then I felt that word, and that word landed and broke
Yeah.
something. And I was like, fall asleep. But my
Wow.
gosh, both times it took me about an hour and a half to
Wow.
work
Yeah.
through
I
it.
know. I know.
Because
It's
you spent 45 minutes not wanting to go there.
I know exactly.
And
I
then by
do
the time
actually
you
think a
finally
lot of
go there,
insomnia is connected to it's actually a trigger.
yeah, totally. Yeah, you wake up and you're like, why did I fight that for so long? But
Yeah.
man,
No,
it
I
just
love that.
shows
And I
how we
love how you
don't want to go to our
shared
pain.
that even an edgy person could be a gift giver and how we're so
Yeah,
quick to reject certain types of personality, especially if they're connected to our trigger, but how certain personalities are actually exactly what we need. And that's why a lot of times if someone's having a hard time with someone, I usually say, like, let's take care of the trigger first. So you know what you really feel about this person. And many times, what you just experienced, they'll be like, oh, I didn't like them because they had anger, but that very anger fought for me and I felt protected in it.
yeah,
So you can't receive that part of it until you deal with your trigger. So I love that it doesn't always come in these perfect packages. Sometimes it comes in a person that you wouldn't expect.
yeah. Well, before we even started, we decided we were going to do this in a couple of parts. And I
Yeah.
think I've got a great way to kind of sum up this part right here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm going to read a little excerpt from a book that I read not too long ago. So I should have looked up how to say this lady's name because I'm going to kill it. But anyway, the book is called I Dared to Call Him Father
Hmm.
by Bilquiz Sheik. Yeah. So anyway, I dared to call him father. It was written in the 1960s about a woman that was Muslim and eventually came to Christian faith. And I want to read this excerpt that she said. She said, "Oh Lord, I cried, where is your comforting spirit? And suddenly I recalled a childhood experience of walking with my father through a marketplace. Father cautioned me to stay by his side, but always active, I wanted to run off. A flower display caught my attention. I ran over to it. Suddenly, I realized that my father was not at my side. Panic filled me and I burst into tears. Oh, Father, I said, come find me and I won't ever run away from you again. Even as I spoke, there he was. No, I'm going to say that again. Even as I spoke, there he was, his tall, slender figure coming quickly toward me through the crowd. I was with him again. All I wanted now was to stay by his side. Now she's speaking as an adult. As I sat in the hotel room, I realized that in fact, I had left my Heavenly Father again. By allowing myself to become anxious, I had run off from his comforting presence. When would I learn that I cannot worry and trust God at the same time? I relaxed in my chair and felt at peace again. She doesn't fully realize it, but she just tapped into the compassion method. And how cool it was that she actually felt that maybe it was
Yeah.
protection that she wasn't feeling. And it probably
Yeah.
was. It really was. She probably wasn't feeling protected because she was
Yeah.
scared and she was in that crowd. How cool it
Hmm.
was that actually it was her earthly father
Yeah.
properly
Hmm.
representing in this case,
Yep.
the Heavenly Father. And she
Yep.
tapped into that feeling
Yep.
and
And
connected it back to,
exactly. And then she was able to have that peace come in the hotel room as an adult because she saw her dad or her
yeah,
gift giver be able to come in and give her that feeling. So now she can connect to God in the same way. I love that
she
story.
tangibly felt that, and
Hmm.
that's
Yep.
what we're talking about with the gifts is like that protection has a tangible feeling.
Exactly.
And And once you felt that, you can go back and re-feel that
Yep.
the rest of your
Anytime.
life. Yeah.
And you can reconnect with it and then reconnect with God. And every time we connect with a gift giver giving us what we needed, especially in early childhood development, it strengthens our relationship with God that much more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is really great, Laura, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing about
Yeah. Yeah.
your
Not
working through your process
definitely.
and your faith side of it. And I look forward to picking this up on the next episode and going in a little bit more depth in a couple other areas. But this is
Yeah.
really fun. I really enjoy it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for doing that. And I'm excited we're going to do part 2 next.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and look forward to joining you on the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye.